All right, let's get our toothbrushes ready because today we're taking a deep dive into Colgate Palmolive's Q3 2024 earnings. We've got their official press release and some extra highlights here, so we're going to unpack it all. But this isn't just about the numbers, though, right? We're going to uncover how Colgate is really navigating the global market. And that means looking at their pricing strategies, volume growth, all that good stuff. We'll even touch on what it might mean for your next trip to the drugstore.
Yeah, what's really fascinating to me about Colgate is how they managed to maintain such incredible global dominance. You might think of them as just a simple consumer goods company, but they're a true powerhouse in the industry. I mean, think about this. They hold a whopping 41.6% of the global market share for toothpaste and 32.3% for manual toothbrushes.
Wow, it's like cornering the market on clean teeth.
Yeah.
So are they just coasting on their reputation at this point, or is there something more to their strategy?
Well, they're definitely not resting on their laurels, that's for sure. This quarter, they saw a 2.4% increase in net sales and a pretty impressive 6.8% surge in organic sales. And that organic part is really important because it means that the growth is actually coming from selling more products, not just price hikes or acquisitions.
Okay, so people are actually choosing to buy more Colgate products. What's the secret sauce? What's driving that?
Well, it seems to be a combination of a few things, really. They've got smart pricing and they're seeing volume growth across all their divisions. It's like they're walking a tightrope, managing to keep things profitable while still appealing to a wider customer base. And this is not just a one-time thing either. This is actually their sixth consecutive quarter of gross margin expansion.
Okay, hold on. I got to stop you there for a second. Can you break down gross margin expansion for me? What does that mean in plain English?
Sure, yeah. Basically, it means they're making more money from each product they sell. So whether it's a tube of toothpaste or a bottle of soap, they're getting more profit out of it. They're either increasing prices or becoming more efficient with their production costs. It's probably a mix of both, honestly.
So, squeezing more profit out of every tube, huh? Smart move, especially in a world with all this inflation. But I'm curious, is this success story playing out consistently across the globe?
Well, that's where things get a little more interesting, you see. While they're definitely cleaning up globally, there are some fascinating regional differences at play here. For example, Latin America is absolutely booming for them right now. They saw a 14.2% jump in organic sales there. It was their highest growth in any region.
Wow, 14.2%. That's a serious surge in sales. I mean, what's fueling that kind of enthusiasm down there? Any guesses?
Well, unfortunately, the press release doesn't really give us any specifics, but it definitely makes you wonder, right? Maybe they've tapped into a regional trend that's specific to Latin America. Or perhaps they've introduced some new products that are specifically tailored to that market. It's a bit of a mystery, honestly.
Yeah, it's definitely a head scratcher. Speaking of mysteries, there's one a bit closer to home that I want to talk about. Their sales actually dipped in North America. And that's even with the skin health business now being included in those numbers. What's the deal there? What's going on?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Are North American consumers shifting their preferences, maybe? Are they, I don't know, embracing those natural brands more? Or are they making the switch to electric toothbrushes over manual ones? The press release doesn't really give us much to go on, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on moving forward.
Okay, so we've got Colgate as this global force to be reckoned with. But it looks like there are some intriguing regional variations in their performance to keep in mind. They're clearly doing some things right, but they're also facing a few challenges here and there. So what are they doing to stay ahead of the game? How are they innovating?
Well, one thing that really stands out to me is their investment in advertising. They've actually increased their spending by 16% this quarter, and they seem to be focusing on what they call science-backed innovation across various price points, which tells me they're pretty serious about staying at the forefront of oral care technology.
So get ready for those sleek, tech-infused commercials coming to a screen near you. But, with that kind of increased spending, can they still maintain their profit margins?
Interestingly enough, yes, they've actually raised their full-year guidance for both net and organic sales growth, which suggests to me that they're pretty confident in their ability to navigate the current economic climate and, keep those profits coming in.
Okay, that's impressive. So it seems like Colgate is really brushing aside the competition, so to speak. They're strategically balancing pricing, volume, and innovation. But here's the real question for our listeners. What does this all actually mean for you?
That's a good question. I think this deep dive gives us a glimpse into how a global giant like Colgate operates. And ultimately, the choices they make are the choices that affect what ends up in your shopping cart, right? It's about understanding the forces that shape the products we use every day and how those forces might impact your next trip to the drugstore.
So it's not just about toothpaste, it's about becoming a more informed consumer in general. All right, before we move on, I have a quick question. The press release keeps mentioning this term, net cash provided by operations, which I'll be honest, sounds pretty technical to me. Can you break that down for us non-accountants out there?
Sure, sure. Net cash provided by operations is essentially the cash that a company generates from its core business activities. It's a really key indicator of their overall financial health.
Okay, so in Colgate's case, it looks like their net cash provided by operations was a pretty robust $2,838 million, at least for the first 9 months of 2024. So what does that tell us about them?
Well, that tells me that Colgate is doing a great job of converting their sales into actual cold, hard cash. And that gives them a lot of financial flexibility to do a number of things. They can invest in new projects, they can pay dividends to shareholders, they could even buy back their own stock, which can ultimately increase the value of their shares.
So they're not just racking up sales on paper, they're actually bringing in the big bucks. But I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of their financial picture. Let's take a closer look at their balance sheet, shall we? What does that reveal about Colgate's financial health?
So a balance sheet is like a snapshot in time. It captures a company's assets, liabilities, and shareholder equity at a particular moment. In Colgate's case, their balance sheet shows they have a very healthy level of cash on hand, and importantly, their assets outweigh their liabilities.
Okay, so they have more than they owe, essentially. That's a good sign, right?
Absolutely. It's a good indicator that Colgate has a strong financial foundation. They're well equipped to handle any economic bumps in the road. But even with this really solid foundation, there are always areas where a company can fine tune their finances. And for Colgate, their working capital is a bit of a head scratcher for me.
Wait, hold on. Back up a sec. What's working capital again?
Working capital is basically the difference between a company's current assets, things like their cash on hand and their inventory, and then their current liabilities, like the bills they need to pay in the short term. It basically shows how much money they have readily available to cover those short-term expenses.
Gotcha, okay. So what's so unusual about Colgate's working capital then?
Well, it's actually negative, coming in at mega 3.6% of their sales, to be exact. And this means they're relying pretty heavily on short-term financing to keep things running smoothly. Things like credit from their suppliers.
So they're playing a little bit of a financial juggling act.
You could say that, yeah. It's not necessarily a red flag or anything, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on. If those short-term credit lines were to dry up, it could put a real strain on their cash flow.
Right, so they need to be carefully managing those relationships with their suppliers. Okay, wow, we've covered a lot of ground here already. Global growth, regional variations, financial strengths, and even a few potential areas for improvement. It's fascinating to see how all these pieces fit together, isn't it?
It really is. And keep in mind, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to discover about Colgate's strategies and how they navigate the ever so complex world of consumer goods.
Well, I'm ready to dive deeper, but first I think we need to take a quick break and come back for part 2 of our deep dive into Colgate-Palmolive's Q3 2024 earnings.
I believe you mean a mental break, not an actual break in the recording.
You're right, of course. But you know what I mean. We'll be right back to explore the potential for disruption in the oral care industry. So stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Colgate-Palmolive's Q3 2024 earnings.
We're ready to uncover more about Colgate's strategies and how they're responding to the ever-changing world of consumer goods. But before we jump into that, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier. Organic sales. I think it's worth clarifying that term for our listeners, just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, you're right. That's a good point. Organic sales is a really crucial metric when you're trying to understand a company's true growth, because it excludes the impact of things like acquisitions and currency fluctuations, which can really skew the numbers. So it gives you a much clearer picture of how much they're growing through their core business operations.
Okay, so in Colgate's case then, that 6.8% surge in organic sales is a pretty strong indicator that their strategy is working. They're not just relying on external factors, right? They're actually selling more toothpaste, toothbrushes, all those core products.
Exactly. And that brings us back to a point we touched upon earlier, their commitment to science-backed innovation. This isn't just some marketing buzzword they're throwing around. It's a really core part of their strategy. And you can actually see it reflected in their pretty diverse product lineup.
Right. They've got everything from the basic fluoride toothpaste to those fancy whitening formulas, manual toothbrushes, electric ones, the whole shebang. It's like they're trying to cover all the bases, huh?
Absolutely. They're catering to a wide range of consumer needs and price points, which ultimately helps them capture a larger share of the market and stay ahead of the competition.
It makes sense, but with so many products already on the market, how do they make sure each one stands out? How do they convince consumers to choose Colgate over all those other brands that are vying for our attention?
Well, that's where their marketing expertise really comes into play. Remember that 16% jump in advertising spending we talked about? They're not afraid to invest in getting their message out there, that's for sure.
And they're being strategic about it too, right? They're not just blasting out these generic ads everywhere. They're really tailoring their campaigns to different regions and demographics.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They're really good at adapting their messaging to resonate with specific audiences. Like in one region, they might emphasize the whitening benefits of their toothpaste, while in another, they might focus more on sensitivity or gum health.
It's pretty fascinating how they're able to speak to so many different consumer needs while still maintaining a pretty consistent brand identity. But marketing is just one piece of the puzzle, isn't it?
You got it. Another key factor in Colgate's success is their global distribution network. Just think about it for a second. You can walk into pretty much any store in the world and find Colgate products on the shelves. That kind of reach is incredibly valuable.
It's like a toothpaste empire with outposts in every corner of the globe. So they're really making sure their products are available to everyone, everywhere. But availability alone doesn't guarantee success, does it?
You're absolutely right. They also have to contend with something incredibly powerful: brand loyalty. Think about your own toothpaste choices for a minute.
Okay.
Have you been using the same brand for years, maybe even decades?
I'll admit, I've been pretty loyal to my toothpaste brand for as long as I can remember, yeah.
Exactly. And that's the kind of loyalty that Colgate has cultivated over generations. It's that familiar feeling of squeezing a tube of Colgate toothpaste. It's comforting, it's reliable. It might even evoke memories of your childhood for some people.
It's like they're not just selling toothpaste, they're selling a feeling, a sense of trust and familiarity. That's powerful stuff.
It really is. But even with such a powerful brand and this vast distribution network, Colgate can't just sit back and relax. The consumer goods landscape is constantly shifting, new trends are always emerging, and they need to keep up.
So what are some of those challenges they're facing then? We touched on the North American sales dip earlier, but what else is on their radar?
Well, one of the biggest trends shaping the consumer goods industry right now, and one that Colgate is definitely trying to address, is this increasing demand for natural and sustainable products. Consumers are becoming more and more conscious of the ingredients in their toothpaste, and the environmental impact of their choices.
Yeah, it's not just about having a sparkling white smile anymore. It's about making eco-conscious choices, too.
Exactly. And Colgate has actually been responding to this trend. They're expanding their portfolio of natural and organic oral care products. But they're not the only ones in this space. There are tons of smaller niche brands that have built their entire reputation on using those natural ingredients.
That's true. And that's where it gets interesting, right? Can a giant corporation like Colgate truly capture the essence of natural and sustainable oral care? Will consumers believe their commitment, or will they just see it as a marketing ploy?
That's the million-dollar question. It's definitely a challenge they'll need to navigate very carefully if they want to win over those eco-conscious consumers. And that's not even the only challenge on the horizon. They're also facing competition from a whole new breed of companies, those direct-to-consumer brands.
Ah, yes. Those are the brands that are cutting out the middleman, like the retail stores. And they're selling their products directly to consumers online.
Exactly. And these brands are usually pretty nimble, they're digitally savvy, and they can build a really strong connection with their customers, through personalized experiences and targeted marketing.
It's a whole new way of doing business. So how is Colgate responding to this shift?
They're adapting, but cautiously. They definitely have a huge advantage in terms of brand recognition and that massive distribution network we talked about. But they're also exploring ways to leverage the power of e-commerce and direct-to-consumer marketing themselves. It'll be interesting to see how they try to integrate these newer approaches into their existing strategies.
So they're acknowledging that the game is changing, and they're taking some steps to evolve. But it's not just about responding to challenges, is it? There have to be some opportunities out there for Colgate as well.
Oh, of course. Challenges often come with exciting new opportunities. Take the demand for natural and sustainable products, for example. This is actually a chance for Colgate to really position themselves as a leader in eco-friendly oral care.
So they could invest in even more sustainable packaging, reduce their environmental footprint even further, maybe partner with organizations that promote conservation efforts.
Exactly. It's about turning their commitment to sustainability into a really tangible, visible part of their brand identity.
I like it. So there's definitely an opportunity there. What about the rise of those direct-to-consumer brands? Could Colgate turn that into an advantage as well?
I think so, yeah. They could explore launching their own online platform, like a virtual Colgate boutique where customers can create personalized brushing routines or get product recommendations and connect directly with the brand.
Ooh, I like the way you think. It's all about embracing that digital landscape and finding new ways to engage with consumers. But it's not just about what's happening online either, is it? We talked earlier about their success in Latin America and other emerging markets. What's their strategy there? What are they doing right?
That's another area of huge opportunity for Colgate. Emerging markets, they often have a growing middle class with an increasing demand for consumer goods. And Colgate is really well positioned to tap into that growth. They've got that strong brand recognition, that global distribution network.
Yeah, it's like they're bringing the power of Colgate to these new corners of the world. But I imagine there must be some unique challenges associated with expanding into these new markets as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. They have to be mindful of the cultural differences. They need to adapt their products and marketing messages to local preferences, and they have to build those relationships with local distributors and retailers. It's definitely not as simple as just setting up shop and expecting success.
Right, they have to really understand the nuances of each market and approach it strategically.
Okay, so we've explored the challenges of these evolving consumer trends, the competition from those new business models, but we've also uncovered some really exciting opportunities for Colgate to actually leverage those trends to their advantage.
Exactly. And as we start to delve deeper into Colgate's overall financial strategy, we'll see how they're actually planning to navigate those challenges
Yeah.
and capitalize on those opportunities. But before we do that, I want to leave you with a question to ponder.
Ooh, a cliffhanger. I love it.
Given this rapidly changing consumer landscape and the rise of these new technologies we've been talking about, how do you think the oral care industry will transform in the next decade? Will we be brushing our teeth with AI-powered smart toothbrushes, those fancy ones? Or will the trusty manual toothbrush and that classic tube of toothpaste remain the staples of our daily oral hygiene routine?
It's a great question to chew on, so to speak. It'll be really interesting to see how Colgate adapts and innovates to stay ahead of the curve. It certainly will. And we'll be exploring these possibilities even further in the next segment of our deep dive, so stay tuned.
All right, welcome back for the final stretch of our deep dive into Colgate-Palmolive's Q3 2024 earnings. And for this last part, we're going to zoom in on their financial strategy. It's the engine that keeps this whole global giant running, fueling their growth, their innovation, even those dividends that shareholders love so much.
Yeah, and what I find really interesting is that Colgate isn't just focused on squeezing out every last penny of profit today. They're playing the long game here, really balancing their growth initiatives with smart, sustainable financial management.
So they're not just brushing, they're flossing their finances too, huh? Making sure everything is in tip-top shape for the future. So what are some of the key ingredients in their financial strategy? What makes them tick?
Well, one of their core principles is this laser focus on cost control. They're constantly looking for ways to streamline their operations, optimize their supply chain, really get the best deals from their suppliers.
It's all about making every dollar count, right? And letting anything go to waste.
Exactly. And that kind of discipline is what allows them to maintain those healthy profit margins we talked about, even when the economy throws them a curveball. Remember, every penny saved can be reinvested in growth, or it can be given back to those happy shareholders.
Makes sense. So cost control is key. What else are they doing to keep their financial ship sailing smoothly?
Another big pillar of their strategy is a strong emphasis on generating cash flow. We touched on this earlier, how good they are at converting sales into actual cash. And that's not by accident. It gives them a lot of flexibility to pursue different strategic moves.
Yeah, it's like having a financial faucet that never runs dry, giving them the resources to invest in new projects, acquire other companies, maybe even buy back their own stock to boost that shareholder value even more.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of strategic moves, they're also very careful about how much debt they take on. They use it strategically, but they always keep it at manageable levels so it doesn't become a burden down the line.
So they're not overextending themselves or building their future on a shaky foundation of debt.
Exactly, they're borrowing responsibly, making sure they can comfortably meet their debt obligations, while still staying financially stable. It's all about finding that sweet spot between growth and stability.
Makes sense. So we've got cost control, cash flow, responsible debt management. What other financial tools are they using to stay ahead of the game?
Well, one area where Colgate consistently excels is their capital allocation strategy. They're very selective about where they invest their resources, focusing on projects that have the highest potential for returns.
So they're not just throwing money at every shiny new idea that comes along. They're really picking and choosing their battles.
Exactly. They have a very disciplined approach, analyzing potential investments very carefully and only putting their money into projects that align with their long-term goals. It's like they're playing a game of financial chess, planning each move very strategically.
And it seems like that strategy has paid off for them. They've been delivering consistent growth, creating value for their shareholders. But even with a rock-solid financial strategy, there are always risks, right? I mean, what are some of the things that could potentially throw Colgate off course?
Well, one of the biggest risks for any global company like Colgate is currency fluctuations. They earn a significant chunk of their revenue from international markets, and changes in those exchange rates can have a real impact on their bottom line.
So if the dollar gets stronger, their earnings from those overseas markets could take a hit.
That's right. It's something they can't fully control, but they have to constantly factor it into their financial planning.
It's like a constant game of adjustments,
Yeah.
trying to stay one step ahead of those currency swings.
So what about other economic challenges? What else are they dealing with?
Inflation is another big one.
Hmm.
When the cost of those raw materials, the packaging, the shipping, all of that goes up, it eats into their profits if they can't raise prices enough to compensate. It's a delicate balancing act, that's for sure. They need to keep their products affordable for consumers, but they also need to protect their own profit margins.
Exactly. Colgate does have a pretty good track record of managing inflationary pressures, but it's definitely something they need to monitor closely. And of course, we can't forget about the ever-changing tastes of consumers.
Right. We talked earlier about that shift towards natural and sustainable products. What happens if Colgate doesn't keep up with those changing preferences?
Well, they could potentially lose ground to some of their competitors who are moving faster in that space. It's like a race to stay relevant. They need to constantly innovate and anticipate what consumers will want next.
It sounds like a tough job. Well, I feel like we've really polished our understanding of Colgate's financial picture today. From their strategic focus on cost control and cash flow to the challenges of navigating a global economy, it's been a fascinating deep dive.
It really has. And I hope this is giving you the knowledge to make more informed decisions as a consumer, whether you're evaluating a stock, choosing a product, or just trying to better understand the forces that shape our world.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, as they say. We always encourage you to keep asking questions, keep exploring, and keep those mental gears turning. That's what these deep dives are all about.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into Colgate-Palmolive's Q3 2024 earnings. Until next time, happy brushing, everyone.